The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the quiet field as Daniel walked the same dirt path he'd taken countless times before. It should have been an ordinary stroll, a chance to clear his thoughts. But halfway down the trail, he froze. At the base of a tangled bush, something small moved against the soil. He bent down, and his heart nearly stopped. There, huddled in the dirt, lay 6 newborn puppies. Tiny, fragile, their ribs visible beneath paper-thin skin. Their cries were faint, almost swallowed by the breeze, and their breaths came in shallow gasps. For a moment, Daniel thought they were gone already. But when one twitched weakly against his palm, he felt the weight of an entire world settle in his chest. They weren't just abandoned. They were dying. And if he walked away, no one would ever know they had been here at all. Clutching them to his chest, he whispered, "You're not alone anymore." He had no plan, no certainty, only a desperate promise that would change his life forever. Subscribe to Shepherd Legacy for more true stories of courage and devotion. Tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from today? The day had begun like so many others. The air was crisp with the scent of last night's rain, and Daniel followed the narrow trail that wound through the quiet countryside outside his small town in Virginia. It was the place he often escaped to when the noise of the world felt too heavy, a strip of earth and sky where silence wrapped around him like a balm. His boots pressed into the damp soil, each step slow, steady, unhurried. Nothing about that afternoon suggested that his life was about to change forever. Then, from somewhere in the grass, a sound pierced the stillness. At first, Daniel brushed it off as a bird hidden in the brush, its call faint and sharp. But then it came again, longer, weaker, and threaded with a desperation that made him stop cold. This wasn't the flutter of wings or the squeak of an animal at play. This was something pleading, something fading. His chest tightened as he tilted his head, listening harder. And then he heard it once more, a fragile cry, so faint it almost disappeared into the wind. His feet carried him forward, careful on the uneven ground, his eyes searching until they landed on a patch of soil near the base of a bush. For a moment, he thought he saw nothing but leaves and dirt. But then, he noticed a fragile movement, barely visible against the earth. He crouched down, and what he saw nearly stole the breath from his lungs. 6 newborn puppies lay in a small heap, their skin pink and hairless, their eyes sealed tightly shut. Their tiny mouths opened and closed, releasing cries that sounded more like whispers of pain than calls for life. Their limbs twitched helplessly, stretching into the air as though reaching for a mother who was nowhere in sight. For a long moment, Daniel could only stare, frozen between disbelief and heartbreak. These weren't just strays. They were newborns, so fragile that every second mattered. Without warmth, without food, without protection, they wouldn't last another hour. His stomach twisted as the reality sank in. He whispered under his breath, voice trembling, "They're going to die here." And then, instinct took over. He reached out, his hand trembling, and lifted the smallest one. It weighed less than an apple, its body trembling against the warmth of his skin. His throat closed with emotion. Holding it was like holding a spark of life that could flicker out at any moment. He quickly gathered the rest, cradling them inside his shirt to shield them from the cool breeze. Standing at the edge of the field with 6 fragile lives pressed against his chest, Daniel realized he was no longer on a walk. He was standing at the beginning of a fight for survival, and he was their only chance. Daniel stood frozen, at the edge of the field, his shirt pressed tightly against his chest, where 6 fragile bodies trembled in shallow rhythm. Their cries were weak, barely louder than the rustle of the leaves, yet each sound pierced deeper into him than any silence could. His mind screamed the cruel truth: they won't survive. They're too small, too helpless, but his heart whispered something else. They deserve a chance. For a moment, he glanced around the empty countryside, half expecting someone else to appear, to take this burden from him. But there was no one. Just him and the tiny sparks of life fading in his hands. He could leave them here, and no one would ever know. But he would know. He would never forget their cries, their helpless mouths opening in hunger, their little paws stretching into nothingness. That memory would haunt him forever. Daniel sank to the ground, his knees pressing into the damp earth as he drew the puppies closer to his chest. His throat ached with emotion. He thought of his own childhood, of nights when he had longed for someone to stay by his side, to choose him when the world had turned cold. The sting of abandonment carved across his memory, sharp and merciless. And in that moment, he knew he could not walk away. Not again. Not even from these fragile creatures who might not survive the night. He whispered into the folds of his shirt, his voice breaking, "You're not going to die here." Not like this. The words startled him. They felt heavier than a vow, heavier than anything he had ever spoken aloud. But once said, they became unshakable, a promise he could not take back. And then, something unexpected stirred inside him. Despite their frailty, despite the odds stacked against them, the puppies were still fighting. Tiny limbs twitched, little mouths opened, searching for nourishment that wasn't there. They weren't ready to give up. And if they weren't, neither was he. Daniel rose to his feet, careful not to jostle the living bundle he carried. His chest tightened, his pulse quickened, but a strange calm steadied him. He didn't know how to save them, and he didn't know if he could. But he knew one thing with certainty: he had to try. He turned toward the dirt path leading home, each step quickening with urgency. The world around him blurred, the golden light of the fading sun, the hum of insects, even the whisper of the wind. All he could hear were the faint cries pressed against his chest, each one a reminder that time was running out. By the time he reached his front door, his palms were damp with sweat, his shirt warm with the trembling heat of 6 fragile lives. He closed the door behind him and placed them gently on the couch. For a moment, he just stood there, breath ragged, staring at the helpless bundle. They were alive for now. But every second mattered, and the hardest fight was only beginning. The puppies lay huddled in a towel on Daniel's couch, their fragile chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. He crouched beside them, his heart pounding, unsure of what to do next. Their tiny cries grew sharper, edged with hunger. Panic clawed at him. What did newborn puppies even need? He knew nothing about creatures this small, nothing about keeping them alive without their mother. He rushed into the kitchen, fumbling through drawers and cabinets like a man racing against time. Towels, blankets, anything that might hold warmth. He piled them into his arms and ran back. He tucked the puppies tightly together, layering them beneath the soft heat of a lamp. Still, their whimpers grew. Warmth wasn't enough. They were starving. Daniel closed his eyes, forcing his thoughts back to childhood. He remembered a faint memory, his grandmother bottle-feeding an abandoned kitten with a dropper. His heart jolted. Could it work? He tore through the kitchen again until his hands closed around a small medicine dropper. He filled a bowl with warm milk, testing it against his wrist, and drew it carefully into the dropper. Kneeling on the floor, he brought it to the mouth of the smallest pup. At first, nothing. Then, after a pause that made his chest lock with dread, the puppy latched weakly, sucking in desperate rhythm. Tears blurred his vision. "That's it. That's it, little one," he whispered. Another pup followed, then another. They were drinking. They were fighting. Daniel's arms ached, his hands trembling as he fed them one by one. His body screamed with exhaustion, but he wouldn't stop. Every drop mattered. By the time the last puppy finally nestled against its siblings with a faint sigh, he was shaking with relief. The night dragged on in fragments. The clock ticked steadily on the wall while Daniel sat stiff and sleepless beside the fragile bundle. Each whimper sent him jolting upright, terrified that one of them had gone still. Every hour, he warmed fresh towels, fed them again, checked their tiny bodies for the faint rise and fall of breath. The smallest pup terrified him most. Its breathing was shallow, uneven, each rise of its chest like a fragile thread about to snap. More than once, Daniel bent low, holding it against his chest, whispering, "Stay with me. Please just stay." Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the room felt like a battlefield. Daniel sat as their lone guardian, fighting back exhaustion, fighting back despair. His eyelids burned, his body throbbed, yet he forced himself awake, again and again, for the sake of 6 tiny lives that had no one else. When the first light of dawn spilled weakly across the room, Daniel slumped back in his chair, the smallest pup curled against his chest. His voice was hoarse, cracked from whispering promises into the night. "You made it," he breathed. "We made it through the night." But deep down, he knew the battle had only just begun. The second night came harder than the first. Daniel sat in the dim glow of the lamp, his body aching from exhaustion, his eyes heavy with fatigue. The puppies rested in their makeshift nest, their breath soft, their tiny bodies pressed close together. For a while he allowed himself to hope, maybe, just maybe, they were out of danger. Then it happened. A sharp, pained cry split the silence. Daniel jolted upright, his chest clenching as his gaze darted to the towel. The smallest pup had gone rigid, its fragile body stiffening as its breaths turned shallow and ragged. Panic surged through him. "No, no, stay with me," he whispered, scooping the little one into his hands. Its eyes remained shut, its mouth opening weakly as if fighting for air. Daniel's heart raced. He fumbled for the dropper, filling it with warm milk, praying it would latch. But the puppy turned its head, refusing, its tiny strength slipping away. Fear clawed at him with brutal force. Feeding had been their lifeline. Without it, what chance did this one have? Tears blurred his vision as he cradled the fragile body against his chest, rubbing it gently with trembling fingers. "Come on, little one, fight, you have to fight." But the cries grew softer, fading until there was almost nothing left. Hours dragged on like a cruel eternity. Daniel stayed awake, his entire world narrowed to the fragile life in his palms. He massaged its tiny chest, whispered desperate encouragements, begged it to keep breathing. He remembered the moment he had found them, helpless, abandoned, doomed to die. He had sworn he wouldn't let them perish alone. And now, holding this life that felt like it was slipping through his fingers, he felt that promise breaking. But just as despair threatened to crush him, the puppy stirred. A faint twitch. A shallow gasp. Daniel's breath caught. He clutched the pup closer, tears streaming down his face. "That's it. That's it. Don't give up now." By dawn, the smallest one was still alive, but barely. Its breaths came in uneven bursts, fragile as glass. Daniel's own strength was spent, his hands trembling with exhaustion. But he knew one thing with brutal clarity. He couldn't do this alone anymore. Gathering the weakest pup in a soft cloth, he carefully placed the others into a basket lined with blankets. Their faint squeaks filled the quiet house as he whispered, "Hold on, little ones. We're going to get help." The drive to the veterinary clinic felt endless. Every bump in the road made him flinch, terrified the fragile bundle might suffer more. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel, his breath catching each time the basket went still. He whispered encouragements into the silence, as much for himself as for them. When he finally rushed through the clinic doors, clutching the basket like it was treasure more precious than gold, the receptionist's eyes widened. "How many?" she asked in shock. "6, Daniel croaked, his voice breaking. "They were abandoned. Please, you have to help them." The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a sharp contrast to the earthy fields where Daniel had first found the puppies. He hovered anxiously over the examination table as the vet, Dr. Hayes, and her assistants worked with calm precision. They lifted each tiny body with gloved hands, checking heartbeats, listening to shallow breaths, examining delicate frames that looked too fragile to belong to creatures alive. Daniel wrung his hands, his chest burning with fear. Are they? Are they going to make it? His voice cracked under the weight of the question. Dr. Hayes placed the smallest puppy gently back on the towel-lined tray. Her expression was steady, but her eyes carried a weight that nearly crushed him. "They're in critical condition," she said softly. "Newborns this young rely completely on their mother for warmth, for nutrition, for immunity. Without her, survival is extremely difficult." Daniel's stomach dropped. The words felt like a sentence. He braced himself for the blow, but Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. "It's not hopeless," she continued, her voice firm, but gentle. "What you've done already keeping them warm, feeding them drop by drop, that gave them a chance. Most people would have walked away. But you didn't." Her words struck him like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. "So, they can survive?" he asked, his voice no louder than a whisper. "It won't be easy," Dr. Hayes admitted. "They'll need constant care feedings every 2 hours, careful monitoring of their temperature, immediate action if one stops eating or breathing. Even then we may lose some. But it's not impossible." Relief and dread collided inside him. Difficult, but not impossible. It wasn't a promise. But it was enough. He leaned over the puppies, his eyes wet as he whispered, "We're not done yet. I'll do everything I can." His voice trembled, but it carried the weight of a vow. Dr. Hayes nodded, her tone steady. "If you're willing to fight for them, I'll fight with you." For the first time since finding the helpless litter, Daniel felt the crushing weight on his chest lift slightly. Hope, fragile, flickering, but real, stirred inside him. The drive home was quieter than the one before. The puppies lay bundled in a basket on the passenger seat, their faint squeaks barely audible over the hum of the engine. But this time, Daniel carried something more than desperation. He carried a plan. He carried fragile belief. At home, his living room transformed into a nursery. Lamps angled downward for warmth, towels layered like blankets, bottles of formula lined neatly on the counter. He scribbled a schedule on a notepad, alarms set for every 2 hours. Exhaustion would crush him, he knew. But failure was not an option. As he cradled the smallest pup in his palm, guiding the dropper to its mouth, Daniel whispered, "You're going to make it. I'll see you through this." The puppy latched weakly, and his chest filled with relief. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Daniel believed it could be won. Weeks blurred into a rhythm of sleepless nights, whispered promises, and fragile victories. Daniel's life revolved entirely around the 6 tiny lives that had once fit in the palm of his hands. Alarms rang every 2 hours, dragging him from shallow sleep to warm bottles and guide tiny mouths to drink. His body ached, his eyes burned, but every squeak, every twitch of life fueled him to keep going. Slowly, change came. Their cries grew stronger, number longer, frail whispers, but sharp little voices demanding to be fed. Their tiny legs, once too weak to push against the towels, began wobbling beneath them as they took their first unsteady steps. Daniel laughed through tears the first time one barked, a sound so small, yet so full of life it felt like a miracle. Neighbors who had once watched him rush home with a basket of blankets now knocked on his door with gifts, formula, old towels, heating pads. Children came to sit cross-legged on the floor, giggling as the puppies tumbled into their laps. Strangers online began following their journey, sending messages of encouragement, calling the pups little miracles. Daniel's once quiet living room now echoed with playful yips, clumsy paw steps, and laughter. What had started as a lonely rescue had become something bigger, a story of survival that had touched an entire community. But with joy came a choice. The puppies were thriving now, their glossy coats gleaming, their bright eyes full of curiosity. They no longer needed saving. They needed families. The thought of letting them go made Daniel's chest ache. They weren't just puppies anymore, they were his companions, his teachers, his reason for fighting through nights that seemed endless. Each one carried a piece of him, and the idea of saying goodbye felt impossible. Yet deep down, he knew it was right. They deserved homes where they would be cherished, yards to run in, children to play with, arms to hold them. One by one, families stepped forward. The bold pup went to a family with a wide-open yard. The playful troublemaker bounded into the arms of two energetic children. The quiet dreamer curled into the lap of an elderly couple who promised endless cuddles. With every goodbye, Daniel whispered into soft ears, "You made it. Don't forget how strong you are." Each farewell stung. Each release tore a piece of his heart away. But each also brought relief, because he knew the puppies were stepping into futures full of love. When the last one left, Daniel sat on his couch in silence, the empty towel nest beside him. For a moment, the loneliness pressed heavy. But then his phone buzzed pictures from the families. Puppies chasing balls, curled in laps, napping in sunlit yards. Joy alive in every image. Tears filled his eyes, but this time they were warm. He hadn't just saved 6 lives. He had changed 6 families forever, looking out at the same dirt path where it all began. Daniel whispered, "You were never meant to be forgotten. You were meant to shine." And in that moment, he knew the story was only just beginning.